Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to a special emergency report created to help those who are immigrants or might be helping innocent people who happen to be immigrants in our country. And it's no small matter. We're tackling one of the most urgent human rights issues of our time, the weaponization of immigrant officers and law enforcement officers against working people. And it's under the guise of law and order. This new administration has revived and expanded policies that threaten to tear families apart, destabilize communities, and target some of the most vulnerable people among us. And yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, there is resistance. Resistance from those who refuse to let cruelty and chaos define our workplaces and our neighborhoods. Today, we'll be speaking with organizers and advocates and reporters who are pushing back, creating sanctuary in unexpected places, and proving that solidarity is our strongest shield. From teachers standing up for their immigrant students to unions rewriting the rules of what it means to protect workers, these are the people finding innovative, compassionate ways to challenge the unchecked power of ICE. And leaked plans show that ICE will be heading into Chicago, and we will be directly speaking to the organizers on the ground, and we'll try to get for you the most current updates on the situation. We'll also explore how deportations are not just acts of cruelty, but tools of economic control, throwing lives into disarray, creating fear, and reinforcing inequality. But for those who might think, well, this doesn't affect my life, we will also explain the economic disruption that will occur across the board for those of us understandably worried about the cost of groceries and other goods. And there is solid data that shows that when President Obama deported a record 3 million people, it did not equate to 3 million jobs for Americans or proportionately higher wages. In fact, in President Trump's first term, he only deported 1.9 million people. And I was somewhat surprised to discover that Biden deported even more than both Trump and President Obama. Although allegedly this was because more people entered the country during his tenure. It is interesting to note that both Democrats and Republicans have engaged in mass deportations. But the type of deportation policies that are currently being proposed can target people here legally under temporary protected status, children born in the U.S. to non-citizens, or people without criminal records who've been working here for decades, who might have had trouble renewing a work visa or have been waiting years for the asylum process to be finalized. So, to get a better understanding of what our country is doing, let's dive into the policies that make this possible, and more importantly, the people and movements fighting back. Because while this is a time of fear, it is also a time when we can show our humanity, our compassion, and our resourcefulness, and to demonstrate the power of collective action. I'm fortunate to be joined by senior investigative reporter Stephen Janis to help me break down this difficult topic. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
First, can you give me just a brief overview of what the Trump administration has been doing?
I mean, it's so complex and so expansive and sprawling. It's difficult to connect all the dots. And we'll be talking to our guests about this. But, for example, he wants to revoke birthright citizenship for people who are born, for children who are born to people who are not here, I guess, legally from his perspective. Another thing he wants to do is deputize, as we were saying before the show, all sorts of law enforcement agents to be able to deport people. So he's ratcheting that up. He's created a national emergency at the border. He has mobilized the military to the border, and he has issued an executive order to conduct emergency raids and to deport people kind of on the spot. I don't know if it's the mass deportation, but it's sprawling. It's like in every aspect. And even more importantly, and even more astounding, it used to be, you can't grab a person at a church or a school. We're not going to have people storming in there with jackets. Well, guess what? That's absolutely on the table now, that people can go into a school or a church or something and just snatch up people. It's scary, really, and it is an expansion of law enforcement I think is unprecedented in our recent history. But we've seen some of this before in the history of this country, but it is so sprawling and so expansive and so permeates every part of life. I think it's going to change a lot for people who thought they might have been voting for Trump, and they're going to see up front how cruel this can be.
Absolutely. And so we want to get started as soon as possible. We are joined by two guests to help us understand who is at risk and what we can do to help. First, we have Natascha Uhlmann, staff writer for Labor Notes and an organizer. Her reporting covers Unite Here, farm workers, immigrant workers, and Mexico's growing independent labor movement. And she's already active in cross-border solidarity. In fact, she's the editor and translator of former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's book, A New Hope for Mexico. Natascha is a member of Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, and she's the author of Abolish ICE. Natascha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And next, we have Moises Zavala. He is an accomplished union organizer with over 25 years of experience. He has developed strategic plans to organize workers for union membership. He trains junior organizers. He serves on the local 881 UFCW executive board, and he is an organizer at Arise, a faith-based labor movement where he helps workers to learn their rights and how to enforce them, including through making collective demands and building workplace committees. Moises, thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So let me turn to you first, Moises. Just tell me a little bit about your organization, Rise, that you work for, because it's a faith-based organization, but also tell us what your concerns are for the people who are at the risk of deportation. And I just want to mention, we heard there might be an update on some of the raids across the country. So if you want to step in and speak about that first, please feel free.
Sure. First of all, Arise Chicago is a worker center, not-for-profit, and what we do here is we support workers that are non-union to organize and protect their rights, organize collectively to improve their working conditions. We have been very involved in creating a rapid response to the problem that we have now of these mass deportations. What we did to create this rapid response was to have our members and community be ready for this. How? By creating trainings with our members and in the community of what to expect and how to be ready for this. Because when a worker is detained by ICE or there is a raid, people get paralyzed because of fear, because of the shock, and it is very hard then to be able to fight that deportation and provide to an attorney what they need to defend these workers. We have created an organizing toolbox for the community and for our members so they could be ready, such as what are the documents that they need to have with themselves at all times? What happens if there is a raid or they're detained? Who is going to pick up their children? Who is going to take care of their last paycheck or be able to go into their bank accounts and be able to provide for the children that are, or the family that's left behind? If the children are sick, who is going to know what kind of medication the children that, have to take, or what are the illnesses? So there's a huge area of readiness that our members and community have been developing now in case the worst happens. If the worst does not happen, then our community is one step ahead.
I mean, aren't they going to classify family members who are actually, citizens or as collaterals or something? We were hearing, Tay and I were hearing about it as we were driving into work to do this show. Do you know anything about that and what that means for people who families?
All I could say is that from the looks of things, it sounds like ICE will pick up anybody that they run into.
Right.
They have a list of names that they are looking for, but clearly that's not going to stop from asking others, say in a household or in a facility where people are working, if they have documentation or not.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jen.
No.
No, I just thought it was really interesting because I believe Tom Homan had been saying that if people who, let's say, we would say are at risk for deportation don't voluntarily leave on their own, they said, oh, well, he was basically saying people are concerned that families will be separated. He said, well, take the family with them.
Yeah, the whole family. They're not going to be separated.
Were people referring to families being deported as collateral, like collateral damage in the war. So that was really disturbing.
But Natascha, I want to ask you, your work is amazing on all this. We were reviewing it, and how historic is this? And we know the first couple raid has happened across the country, about 400 or 500 people. First, what do you know about this, and how unprecedented is this effort by the Trump administration, historically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing an escalation. Some employers are already instituting non-mandated employment authorization checks. Some 100 custodial and kitchen workers at New York City's Tin Building were fired after building management carried one of these out. They're
Mm.
effectively called silent raids, and they're, every bit as damaging as the more visible raids that tend to get more publicity. So a lot of this stuff can happen sort of quietly
Wh-
too. Um,
What do you mean by silent raids? I just so people understand, because that I didn't know exactly what that meant. So can you just give us a description of what a silent raid is?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, your employer can, in a way that it is not mandated to do, say, I want to check that you're authorized to work here, even if you've been working here for a year, for 10 years.
Hmm.
And it's a way of clearing out, if you are knowingly hiring undocumented workers, it's every bit as damaging to
Okay.
get rid of them, but in a way that often just goes unnoticed because it's not the sort of showy ice bursting through the door, right?
That's really
Um,
interesting. That's
yeah.
horrifying too. And do you know anything about the raids that have occurred with the 400 or 500 people in Illinois and Maryland and a couple other states, Utah? I mean, have you heard? Has anyone said anything to you about these?
I mean, so it's really a rapidly developing situation, but I think a few things are clear. The first is that bosses are absolutely going to abuse this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, and the second is that ICE and Border Patrol are going to throw a lot of things at the wall and see what sticks. And
Mm.
we're going to need to do the same, right? Experiment with tactics, see what sticks, but always with an eye to building power in a strategic way.
Let me ask you, Moises, something. When you're speaking to immigrants in your community, what are their fears and what are they trying to do to address them? I know you're doing organizing. I know you're trying to prepare people, but what are their fears at
The,
heart?
the fear is the unknown.
Mm.
What's going to happen? How is it going to happen? And we don't have those answers. But what we do have is the ability to organize. And more than ever, we are sharing with our members that this is the time to organize with their coworkers, with their community, with their churches, the schools where the children go, to really solidify that network that we have and use it to organize support. Because this is not the first time that working families are attacked in this fashion. It's happened before, and in the past, workers and communities organized very sophisticatedly to be able to win those types of oppressions. And we have to do the same thing. We have to continue that effort of unity, of organizing and information so that people do not feel or do not have that fear that is going to paralyze them. It's we don't have all the answers, but what we do know is that people want to live in peace and people can organize. And that is the avenue in which our members are taking to be able to have some stability in their lives at this moment.
Natascha, the one of the executive orders was getting rid of the birthright citizenship. How destructive do you think this will be? Do you think it will stick? Do you think the Trump administration will be able to make this stick? It really is, contradicting the Constitution. But nevertheless, how destructive is this to families, and what are your concerns about that?
Yeah, absolutely. First, can I jump in on the fear question after this?
Oh,
Absolutely. You can
please,
jump
Amazing.
in now
do.
if you want to start with
Okay.
that. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, on the topic of fear, I mean, this is without question a scary moment, but it is really essential that we don't do the right's work for them. They want people to be afraid. They want to project way more strength than they have in hopes that people will self-deport or remove themselves from public life.
Mm.
Like I'm seeing a lot of bad actors who are seizing on this moment to spread terror. I heard from one organizer that a photo circulating spreading panic of an ICE van was actually photoshopped. And I've also seen someone screen cap a photo from an ICE raid in 2018 and post it and say it was this week. So
Wow.
a lot of
Well,
organizers I talk to right now are saying spread power, not panic. If you're sharing information about a raid, verify it first. It can be tempting to just want to get that info out there. And I certainly feel that urge, but it's really important not to play into the right's hands and not to spread fear and uncertainty.
do you have any sense of who is spreading this fear and why they would want to do that? Are they trying to exploit workers, or is there some motivation behind that? Just curious.
I mean, it's all very developing, so I can't.
I know, totally understand. It just
Yeah.
struck me like, wow, what a horrible thing to do to people. What's your motive there?
I think just abject cruelty. I mean, I certainly do
wow.
think bosses are very much prepared to take advantage of this moment, no
Right.
question.
Right.
But I can go back to the birthright
Yeah, sure,
question.
of course,
Okay,
absolutely.
cool. Yeah, it's absolutely heinous, and it's just a complete mess because where do you draw the line, right? Like babies born today, a year ago, 10 years ago.
Right.
And also his claim that the US is the only country that offers birthright is just actually factually wrong, right? Canada and Mexico, for starters, like our literal backyard, Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, like this is not an uncommon practice.
Wow.
You know, and just to make this clear, because one of the things that was mentioned in the inauguration speech was the idea that the people who are in this country that are immigrants are somehow criminals. And I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that if someone is engaged in transporting narcotics or human trafficking, no matter what your status is, you're committing a crime. But we're hearing there's so many people like clergy and teachers and employers, they're worried about protecting community members that are valued, hardworking people, and even children. I was hoping, and this is either for you, Moises, or for you, Natascha, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the people at risk. You know, describe who they are, help put a face to it so people understand who you're trying to protect.
It's everyday people. Everyday people are at risk. Students, restaurant workers, grocery workers, factory workers, everybody is at risk because we don't carry an ID that says I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm a permanent resident, I'm undocumented. Hey, if you look Mexican, we're going to have to pull you over. Show me some papers. That's the kind of world in which we live in right now. If it was that simple where, hey, here's a list, these are people that you have to go and find, yeah, that's one thing. But that's not what we're hearing. So again, we're living in a moment where we have to inform faster than before, broader than before, and really organize to be able to push back, to be able to make sure that workers know what their rights are. For example, they're going to get, if there is a raid or they get pulled over or they're stopped on the street. What's the first thing that we mentioned in our trainings? Remain silent. Remain silent. We have little cards that say, I'm going to remain silent and I want to speak to my attorney. They kind of look something like this, where the worker can put in their pocket and show it to an ICE agent. So this is what we're doing to be able to fight off this environment of fear. I mean, attacking birthright citizenship, it's just another way to create fear and to create anger and to try to point at people and wonder, hey, I wonder if he or she is a U.S. citizen. Well, let's ask them, right? That's what we're, I hope it doesn't get to that point, but it sure as heck looks like it is. So we have to be ready for that. We have to push back.
You know, Natascha, go ahead. You go ahead. Go, absolutely. I don't need to ask a question.
I think Moises makes some excellent points. Just to add to that, there's often this sort of outrage of, well, they broke the law to come here. Why didn't they come the right way? Why didn't they get in line? Well, first of all, for many people, there just simply is no line to get into. But secondly, often the people who say this are often the same people who say things like, I would do anything for my child. I would kill for my child, right? And I think it's really important to tap into that shared humanity. People are coming here because they have hopes and aspirations, and they want to give their kids something that they didn't have. And you cannot tell me as a parent, if you could not feed your kid, you wouldn't cross some damn line for them. Like, I think these are the conversations that we need to be having.
Yeah. Well,
The
Natascha,
other thing that I would
okay.
the other thing that I would add when we talk about criminalizing undocumented workers is, well, what are we talking about? They just pardoned 1,500 criminals that attacked our capital. And what is it? What are we talking about when we say criminals?
Well, one of the things, and I wanted both of you, if you want to jump in on understanding, have they canceled the ability to ask or seek asylum? Speaking of cruelty, I think that was in part of the executive orders. Is that playing out? Is that correct?
I believe that's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because seeking asylum is an important part of that process you were talking about.
Yes.
For people trying to come here, right? If that goes away, what happens?
People continue to see the United States as a place of hope. And people will continue, like Natascha mentioned, they will continue to walk the miles and miles for their children. I don't think it's fun to be walking through the desert or through a jungle. These are needs, but there are different ways to welcome people into this country. But the way this new administration is going about it, it's simply just to create chaos and create fear.
Yeah.
You know, I think you brought up such a good point that these people are doing what any American would say they would do for their family, which is I would do anything for my child. I think you brought up such a great point, both of you. And I hate to bring up something that stokes more fear, but there have already been instances of anti-immigrant violence. I mean, back in December, there were 2 teenagers in New York. They were asked by a group of men if they spoke English. When they said no, they didn't speak English. They were both stabbed and one died. Of course, in Springfield, Ohio, after Haitians were falsely accused of being in the U.S. illegally and harming pets and spreading disease, there were marches by white supremacists, and there were 30 bomb threats in 1 week. So I have to ask you both, are there any concerns that there could be vigilante actions against the immigrant community?
Look, it could very well be, but I think it's also on all of us to play a role in making sure that this changes. It's not just for immigrant rights organizations like ours to be fighting this off. We will. That's what we do. But it's also the participation of the rest of our communities to stand up and to fight against this kind of attacks on all of us.
Yeah, I would just add, I think a lot of this work will come down to talking to people who don't agree with you, building bonds of trust and solidarity, and then you can have that conversation, right? Like, it's not the undocumented worker making $5 an hour under the table who's getting the better end of the deal, right? Like, he didn't choose that, the boss did. And if there wasn't some arbitrary designation of immigration status, the boss couldn't get away with paying him $5 an hour. Like, it is the vulnerability of immigration status itself that creates the conditions where a boss can undercut you. I just wanted to flag, we've got a great piece in Labor Notes called Worker Solidarity is the Best Strategy to Defeat Rising Fascism. And it talks about exactly that. It is in the boss's interest to have us at each other's throats, keep us divided, see each other as a threat. And I think it's going to take talking to people who don't agree with us, not violent people like that, but I think it's what it's going to have to look like.
Yeah. One thing I want to note, I think what happened with the asylum process is now people have to remain in Mexico, I believe. Right. Just a little correction there or kind of clarification. But yeah, that is, I mean, as a reporter, what is there any story that stands out to you or something that sort of shows the cruelty and the inhumanity of this or that has affected you in any way?
I think there's so many, but
right.
Unfortunately they largely precede Trump, right? Like even under Obama, we had kids in deportation hearings, and I remember reading like their feet couldn't even touch the floor is how little they were, right? Like they didn't know their last name is how little they were. So unfortunately, this is a bipartisan affair, and I think that it's just a total abdication of leadership on behalf of the Dems, and that handed us Trump, right? Like, if you're going to condemn Trump's rhetoric and fall all over yourselves to top it, like in the support for the Lake and Riley Act, I don't know. Like, yeah, it's not only morally reprehensible, but yeah, it's a total abdication of leadership, and it's just bad politics, right? You want to tell us come election time that Trump's a fascist, that this is the most important election of our lives. But then if you're going to fall right into place and advance his agenda, like what is the political calculus, right?
It's a great point.
I actually have a dozen more questions I want to ask, but I want to make sure that I ask the most important question. And this is for people who want to take action, but maybe let's say they aren't directly involved in a union. What are some ways they can support immigrant workers and help create sanctuary workspaces or just safe spaces in their own communities? And I'll go to you first, Moises, and then to you, Natascha.
A number of things that they can do. One is they can reach out to a church in their community, find out if their church is doing any work or is willing to do some work and take on some of the responsibilities to create that support base in the community. Talk to the schools. Obviously, contact a worker center like us. Would be more than happy to share the work in supporting our community. So there's a range of ways that they can support. They can contact their aldermen, their elected officials, find out what is it that they're doing. If it's obviously a state like in Illinois, what are they doing and how can they participate to strengthen the work that those elected officials are doing? So thank you for that question. That is what we need to be thinking about. How can we incorporate and encourage others to have a role in this support base for these workers?
Yeah, there's a lot of good language you can include in your collective bargaining agreements. Like the Chicago Teachers Union has some good language about how you don't let ICE through the door unless they got a signed warrant. But a teacher I spoke with for a recent story with Sarah Lazar, teacher's name was Catherine Samarron. She made a really important point that good contract language is only useful if people know their contract, right? Like if someone's going to have to be the person when ICE is at the door that says, hey, don't open that door. We don't have to let them in. So this piece I referenced at Labor Notes and Workday, Sarah Lazar and I collected the best collective bargaining agreement language that we found with these sorts of protections against retaliation, against non-mandated audits, stuff you're going to want in your contract. So you can find that on both the Labor Notes and Workday magazine websites. But in addition, I think worker centers and community groups also have a really important role to play. There's all the work Arise is doing, which has been integral. Escucha Mi Voz Iowa, a faith-based community org, has committed to having 6,000 one-on-one conversations with church members in the area. And interestingly, they likened it to how organizers build a union, talking to people who don't agree. It's going to be a slow process of building trust, of being in dialogue. It's going to be like exceptionally frustrating, but you got to bring in people who don't agree, or we're just going to be talking to each other. And finally, I would just point to there are very practical things you can do in your community. Like I spoke with one organizer who turns out a crowd when a community member needs to go to an ICE check-in because ICE will generally not make detentions during public events as a safety precaution for their agents. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. If you're not in a union, organize, reach out to one of the incredible worker centers, supporting these organizing efforts, or to EWOC, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. But I think everyone has a role to play, and it's going to take all of us.
Well, you know what? We're going to make a point of putting in our YouTube description perhaps a link to that article that you wrote with Sarah Lazar. I think you might also have some tips. That would be great. I think the same with you, Moises. I think you at the beginning, you held up what looked like a little pamphlet or handbook. Perhaps we could post a link to that as well so that people can see for themselves things that they can do if they want to help protect their fellow community members. I want to thank you both so much for joining us for this emergency live stream. We know we grabbed you last minute, and we know you both have a lot of important work to do. So we want to thank you so much for your time. Sure. I feel like you want to add one thing, Moises.
Yes, one thing very important. Despite the fear that is being thrown at us, I think that it is these moments that draw out the best in us to organize, to change, and to create power. And we just got to remember that because our communities have done that in the past. And we need to continue to do it today and teach it for the future.
I'm so glad that you ended us on such a positive note, to not give in to fear, but that this is a time where we can join together to do something positive. Thank you both again for your time. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Once again, I want to thank our guests, Moises Zavala from Arise and Natascha Uhlmann of Labor Notes, for discussing this human rights issue with us.
And get her book, Abolish ICE.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
A great book.
But most importantly, we want to thank you for not only working in your communities to provide protection, but teaching us how we can help. We appreciate your time and your work, and we want to thank you again for joining us. And we also want to thank everyone for watching and taking the time to listen and taking the time to care. Our immigrant neighbors aren't our enemies. They're our friends, our coworkers, and they're even our family. Let's keep sharing the things that make our country truly great. being open, being innovative, being welcoming, and being compassionate, and being a place where anyone who works hard at least has a chance at the American dream. Thank you so much for joining us.